Story 1. I reserved a rental for 3 nights. It was a compact, one-bedroom flat on the 4th floor of an aging building, tucked into a quiet part of the city. The listing boasted glowing reviews, mostly highlighting its cleanliness and convenient location. I wasn't looking for anything extravagant, just a secure, cozy spot to rest during my business trip. Upon arrival, the host greeted me outside to hand over the keys. He was a middle-aged man named Daniel, friendly but hurried. "Sorry, I can't stay long," he said. "I've got another meeting, but if you need anything, just text." I thanked him and lugged my bag upstairs. The apartment matched the description, small but tidy. There was a modest living area with a worn-out couch, a tiny kitchen, and a single bedroom with a queen-sized bed. The bathroom was basic, featuring an old yet functional shower. What caught my attention was the bedroom window, a large pane framed in vintage wood that overlooked a narrow alleyway between buildings. The alley itself wasn't much, just a shadowy gap filled with dumpsters and the occasional stray dog. A corroded fire escape clung to the side of the building, leading up to the roof. One detail unsettled me. The window lacked a proper lock, relying instead on a simple latch. I reassured myself it wasn't a concern. It was the 4th floor, after all. No one could climb up here. After unpacking, I grabbed dinner from a nearby cafe and settled in for the night. Exhausted from traveling, I turned in early. The room felt stuffy, so I cracked the window slightly to let in fresh air. The distant hum of the city faded into muffled silence. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a faint rustling sound. Half asleep, I assumed it was merely the wind, but as I shifted, I glimpsed the window. A shadow moved. My breath hitched. I bolted upright, heart racing, and stared at the glass, but nothing was there. Just the dark alley beyond, illuminated faintly by a street lamp casting long shadows across the brick walls. I convinced myself it was likely my imagination, or perhaps a bird perched outside. Still, I got up to close the window, ensuring the latch was secure before climbing back into bed. I lay awake for hours, listening intently. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I drifted off. The next day, I spent most of the afternoon in meetings and had dinner with colleagues. By the time I returned to the flat, it was past 9 p.m. As soon as I stepped inside, something felt off. Nothing obvious. The door was locked. Everything appeared untouched, but the air seemed stale, as though someone had been there while I was gone. I checked my belongings. My suitcase remained zipped, my laptop undisturbed on the table, the kitchen exactly as I'd left it. I dismissed the sensation and tried to relax. Old buildings often had quirks, I reasoned. That night, I double-checked the window before sleeping. I even drew the thin curtains shut, just in case. I fell asleep faster this time. At some point, I stirred, not fully awake, drifting between dreams and consciousness. A noise reached my ears, a soft, repetitive tapping. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, the streetlight casting faint patterns against the curtains. The tapping persisted, tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. My stomach tightened. I froze, barely breathing. The tapping wasn't random. It had a deliberate rhythm. Careful not to make a sound, I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and yanked the curtain aside in one swift motion. The beam of light hit the window and revealed a face pressed against the glass. I gasped, paralyzed with fear. The face was pale, skin taut over sharp cheekbones, eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the light like an animal caught in headlights. For what felt like eternity, we stared at each other. Then, without a sound, the figure pulled away, vanishing into the night. I scrambled out of bed, heart pounding, and rushed to the window, phone still in hand, shining the light outside. Nothing. The alley below was empty. The fire escape stood still and rusted, showing no signs of movement. I inspected the window latch. It was locked, which made no sense. If it had been locked, how had someone pressed their face against it? I spent the remainder of the night sitting up in the living room, every light in the flat blazing. By morning, I was drained but determined to find answers. I searched online for reports of break-ins in the area, but found nothing recent. I messaged Daniel, the host. Hey, weird question, but has anyone ever mentioned seeing people outside the window here? He replied after a delay, his response sending a chill through me. Why? Did something happen? It wasn't a denial. I debated sharing the full story, but decided against it, simply saying I thought I saw someone in the alley. He responded quickly, probably just a homeless guy. Happens sometimes. I'll alert the neighbors. That didn't ease my anxiety. I spent the day on edge, double-checking the window and glancing over my shoulder whenever I left the flat. Part of me wanted to leave early, but I convinced myself I was overreacting. It was my final night. I just had to endure it. I didn't sleep. I kept every light on, sitting in bed, watching the window, waiting. The night dragged on as the city grew quieter. The alley remained deserted, no movement. Then, just past 3 a.m., I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate. My body went cold. The curtains were drawn. I couldn't see the window or who or what was behind it. For a long time, I sat frozen, my breathing shallow. The tapping continued, insistent, as if whoever was out there knew I was awake. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed emergency services. The operator answered. "There's someone outside my window," I whispered. The tapping ceased for a moment, followed by silence. Then came movement, the scrape of feet on metal. Whoever it was, they were climbing. "Stay inside," the operator instructed. "Officers are en route." I clutched the phone like a lifeline, my pulse thundering. The footsteps reached the roof, then stopped. I waited, barely breathing. 5 minutes passed. 10. When the police arrived, they searched the building. They found nothing, no forced entry, no footprints on the fire escape, only an empty alley. Before leaving, one officer pulled me aside. "Are you sure you saw someone?" he asked. I almost doubted myself, but I knew what I'd seen. I packed my bags and left before sunrise. A week later, I checked the rental listing again. It was still active, but a new review caught my eye. Loved the place, but the alley window gave me the creeps. Thought I saw someone watching me at night. Story 2. I frequently traveled for work, and hotels were starting to feel impersonal and repetitive. That's why I decided to book an Airbnb this time, a private home promising solitude in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The photos showcased warm wooden floors, a cozy living room, and a well-stocked kitchen. The host, a man named George, had glowing reviews. Guests described him as friendly but not intrusive. His profile picture showed a cheerful older gentleman, perhaps in his late 60s. A few days before my trip, I messaged George to confirm check-in details. He replied promptly, "No problem at all. The key is in a lockbox next to the door. Let me know if you need anything during your stay." Sounded simple enough. Being left alone in a charming little house for a few nights seemed perfect. I arrived just after sunset. The house matched the pictures, small, inviting, with soft orange light glowing through the windows. It sat on a serene street with no visible neighbors, which didn't bother me. I preferred solitude. I found the lockbox, entered the code George had sent, and retrieved the key. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and aged books. The wooden floors creaked slightly underfoot, adding to the cozy atmosphere. A welcome note sat on the counter. "Make yourself at home. Let me know if you need anything. George." After unpacking, I made tea and settled onto the couch with my laptop. By 10 p.m., I locked up and headed to bed. The bedroom was modest but comfortable, with thick blackout curtains. Exhausted from the drive, I fell asleep quickly. Sometime later, I woke to a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it might be a tree branch brushing against the window. But as I lay awake, I realized the noise was coming from inside the house. Tap, tap, tap. Soft but distinct, seemingly from the kitchen. I held my breath, listening. The house was silent, except for the refrigerator's hum. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe something shifted in the sink, or a utensil fell. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke feeling rested. The house felt peaceful again. Over coffee, I checked my phone. George had messaged, "Hope everything's good. Let me know if you need anything." I replied that everything was fine, though I almost mentioned the noise. Deciding it was probably nothing, I let it go. That day, I worked remotely, occasionally stepping outside for fresh air. the house remained calm and comfortable. By evening, I felt settled. But as I brushed my teeth, I noticed something odd. The bathroom door, which I always left open, was slightly ajar. My heart began to race. Had I closed it without realizing? I nudged it open. The hallway beyond was dark and still. I double-checked the doors. They were locked. Even so, unease settled in my stomach as I climbed into bed. Tap, tap, tap. I bolted upright. This time, I was certain the sound was inside the house. Grabbing my phone, I crept out of bed. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. Then I saw it. The pantry door was slightly open. I never used the pantry. Trembling, I yanked the door open. Nothing. Just shelves stocked with canned goods and pasta boxes. Still uneasy, I rechecked all the locks before returning to bed. The next morning, while making coffee, I noticed something unsettling. The back door's deadbolt was unlocked. I knew I had locked it before bed. Fear prickled my skin. I called George. He answered cheerfully. "Hey, everything okay?" "Yeah, has anyone ever mentioned issues with doors unlocking on their own?" There was a pause. "No, never. Why?" "I thought I locked the back door last night, but it was open this morning." Another pause. Then George laughed. Yeah, that door's tricky sometimes. The lock doesn't catch unless you twist it hard." Something about his tone made my skin crawl. I forced a chuckle, thanked him, and hung up. The unease lingered that night. I pushed a chair in front of the back door. If it moved, I'd know for sure. I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me flinch. At 3 a.m., I heard its slow, deliberate footsteps inside the house. Shaking, I grabbed my phone. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then the creak of a door opening. I leapt out of bed, bolted for the front door, and ran outside, locking myself in my car. Trembling, I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. Officers searched the house while I waited in my car. When they returned, one of them looked puzzled. "You said you were here alone?" he asked. I nodded. He held up a set of keys. "We found these in the pantry. One of them fits the front door." My stomach dropped. No one was found inside, but one thing was clear: someone had been there, and they had a key. I grabbed my things and left immediately. Later, I checked George's reviews again. Buried deep, I found a comment. "House was nice, but I woke up one night feeling like I wasn't alone. Wouldn't stay again." George deleted his Airbnb listing the next day. Story 3. I frequently traveled for work, and over time, I grew more comfortable staying in this way. They were often cheaper, offered more privacy, and occasionally felt like a real home away from home. For this trip, I needed a place for 3 nights in a mid-sized city where my company had booked me for a conference. I wanted something close to the venue, but not in the chaos of downtown. I found an Airbnb that seemed perfect. A sleek 1-bedroom apartment in a quiet suburban area, just a 15-minute drive from the conference center. host, a woman named Sarah, had glowing reviews. Dozens praised her responsiveness and friendliness. The listing mentioned self-check-in via a keypad lock, which I preferred. No awkward small talk with strangers handing over keys. I booked it without hesitation. I landed late in the afternoon and took a rideshare straight to the property. The neighborhood matched the description. Calm streets lined with trees and well-kept houses. The apartment was on the second floor of a duplex, accessible via an external staircase. The keypad worked smoothly, and the door opened with a soft beep. Inside, everything was immaculate and exactly as pictured: a stylish living room, a kitchen with modern appliances, and a bedroom with neatly made bedding. The faint scent of freshly laundered sheets lingered in the air. I dropped my bag, checked emails briefly, then locked up and headed out for dinner. That first night passed uneventfully. I returned around 9 p.m., showered, watched TV in bed, and fell asleep shortly after 2 a.m. I woke suddenly, unsure what had disturbed me. The apartment was silent. No car alarms outside, no voices in the hallway, just an eerie stillness. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic clicking sound. I turned toward the bedroom door, listening intently. The noise came from the front door, a slow, deliberate series of clicks, as if someone were testing the keypad. My chest tightened. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. The clicking continued for several seconds, then stopped. I waited, straining to hear any movement outside. Nothing. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was probably someone entering the wrong code at a neighboring unit's door, perhaps a drunk neighbor fumbling with their keyless entry system. Still, I got up, checked the lock, and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I reassured myself not to overthink it, returned to bed, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I left early for the conference. My mind focused on work, and I barely thought about the strange sound from the previous night. That evening, I stopped at a grocery store to pick up snacks and bottled water before heading back to the Airbnb. When I arrived, I punched in the keypad code and stepped inside. Something felt off. At first, I couldn't pinpoint it, but as I moved through the space, my skin prickled with unease. The air felt different lived in. Then I saw it. The bathroom door was half open. I was certain I'd left it closed that morning. I always shut doors behind me, especially in unfamiliar places. A cold wave of fear crept over me. I slowly walked to the bathroom and pushed the door open all the way. The mirror was slightly fogged, as though someone had used the shower recently. My stomach dropped. I checked the towels, they were dry. The sink, dry. The shower, also dry. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the humidity in the apartment caused condensation on the mirror. Or maybe I hadn't closed the door tightly enough. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I double-checked the front door, ensuring it was locked, and wedged a chair under the doorknob before going to bed. The apartment was dark when I woke suddenly in the middle of the night. I wasn't sure why. I hadn't heard a loud noise or experienced a nightmare, but a deep, unnerving sense of wrongness gripped me. Then I heard it. A soft creak in the hallway. I froze. I had been alone when I went to bed. The door was locked, and the chair was still wedged under the handle. Another creak, closer this time. A chill ran down my spine. Someone was inside. I reached for my phone, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My fingers fumbled to turn on the flashlight, pointing it toward the door. The handle twitched. I sucked in a sharp breath, unable to move, unable to make a sound. Then, slowly, it turned. The chair blocked the door from opening fully, but it moved an inch. Whoever was on the other side paused, then hurried footsteps retreated down the hall. A second later, I heard the front door open and slam shut. I jumped out of bed, shaking, and ran to check the lock. It was intact, meaning whoever had been inside had left, and they must have had their own way in. I called the police. When they arrived, I explained everything. They searched the apartment, but found nothing stolen and no signs of forced entry. One officer asked, "Are you sure no one else has access to this place?" I shook my head. The host had said only the keypad was used. They inspected the door and found no tampering marks. The person had entered with a key. I messaged Sarah, demanding to know if anyone else had access. She read the message, but never responded. That's when I checked the reviews again. Most were positive, but buried among the older ones, I found one that made my stomach churn. Great place, but weird experience. One night, I swear I heard someone trying to get in. Thought I was imagining it, but now I'm not so sure. I packed my bags and left before sunrise. A week later, the listing was deleted. Story 4. I booked the cottage because I desperately needed peace and quiet. After months of city noise, deadlines, and constant interaction with people, I craved solitude. I wasn't interested in a fancy hotel or a crowded beach, just somewhere remote, away from everything. I found the listing on Airbnb. A charming, secluded cottage on the outskirts of a small village. The photos showed a rustic wooden house surrounded by open fields, with dense woods lining the horizon. It looked perfect. No neighbors, no traffic, just silence. The host, a woman named Laura, had glowing reviews. Guests described her as helpful, but not intrusive, which suited me perfectly. I booked 5 nights. The drive was long, but I didn't mind. Once I passed the last gas station, the road narrowed, twisting through fields and patches of thick forest. By the time I reached the cottage, the sky was darkening. It was even more isolated than I'd imagined. No other houses in sight, just the cottage, the fields, and the woods. Laura met me outside. She was in her early 60s, wearing jeans and a faded cardigan. Her silver hair was tied back, and her handshake was firm. "Hope you had a smooth drive," she said. "Place is all yours. I live about 2 miles down the road, so if you need anything, just call." She handed me the keys, gave me a quick tour, and left. Inside, the cottage was cozy. Wooden floors creaked underfoot, old furniture filled the rooms, and a faint smell of cedar lingered in the air. The living room had a stone fireplace. The kitchen was small but functional, and the bedroom had a large window overlooking the fields. There was an attic door in the hallway, but it was locked. I didn't think much of it that night. I sat on the porch, listening to crickets chirp. No sirens, no honking cars, just open space and silence. I slept better than I had in months. The second night, I noticed something strange. I was getting ready for bed when I saw a faint glow coming from the hallway vent, a thin sliver of light. It was coming from the attic. I frowned. The attic was locked, and Laura had never mentioned a light up there. Maybe it was an old wiring issue. I grabbed my phone and messaged her. "Hey, I just noticed a light in the attic. Should I be worried?" she replied a few minutes later. "No worries. The attic stays locked. Nobody's up there. Might be a reflection from outside." That didn't make sense. The attic had no windows. I decided to ignore it, turned off the lights, and got into bed. That's when I heard it, a slow, deliberate creaking above me. A single footstep. I held my breath. Another creak. It wasn't the house settling. It was rhythmic, like someone shifting their weight. My body tensed, every nerve on edge. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Then, silence. I barely slept. Morning came, and I convinced myself I had imagined it. Old houses make noises, wood expanse shifts. I went about my day, hiking a nearby trail and reading on the porch, trying to enjoy the quiet. But that night, as I lay in bed, I saw it again, the attic light, a thin glowing line around the ceiling vent. And then movement. A shadow passed in front of the light. I shot upright in bed, my heart hammering. I wasn't imagining it. Someone or something was up there. I grabbed my phone and called Laura. "Hey," I said, my voice tight. "Are you sure no one has access to the attic?" "Positive," she said. "It's been locked for years." I hesitated. Could an animal have gotten in? A raccoon or something? "Not possible," she said firmly. The attic's sealed tight. I didn't know what to say. After a pause, Laura sighed. "Look," she said, lowering her voice. "That house is old. I wouldn't worry about it. But if it makes you feel better, I can come by in the morning and check it out." I told her that would be great. I didn't sleep at all. Laura arrived around 10 a.m. I led her to the attic door in the hallway. It was an old wood door with a rusted metal handle, no keyhole, just a latch. She pulled a key from her pocket, hesitated, then unlocked it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading up into darkness. A stale, musty smell drifted down. "You want to go first?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She let out a dry chuckle. "Not really." She flicked on her flashlight and started up the stairs. I followed close behind. The attic was empty, no furniture, no old boxes, just bare wooden beams and dust-covered floorboards. A single ancient light bulb hung from the ceiling. Laura flipped the switch, and the bulb flickered to life. "See," she said. "Nothing up here," I exhaled. I felt ridiculous, but then something caught my eye in the far corner of the attic, just behind a support beam. The dust was disturbed. Faint, uneven trails like footprints. Laura saw it too. She walked over and knelt down. "Probably just an animal," she muttered. But there was something else, a small hole in the wall. Laura peered through it, then stood up quickly. Her face had changed. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, brushing off her jeans. "I'll patch this up later. You should be fine now." She left in a hurry. I felt anything but fine that night. I was determined to ignore the attic. I locked my bedroom door and kept the lamp on. I was finally starting to relax when I heard a long, slow dragging sound above me, not footsteps. Something heavy moving. I gripped my blanket, my body frozen. Then, a soft knock, not from the front door, but from the attic. The sound sent ice through my veins. I forced myself to move. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped into the hallway. The attic door was closed. I slowly raised the light, and that's when I saw it. A single dusty handprint on the attic door, large, smudged fingers, too long. I backed away, my pulse hammering. I didn't care what Laura had said. I wasn't spending another second in that house. I grabbed my bag, my keys, and ran. I drove straight to a motel in town. I barely slept, every sound making me jump. The next morning, I called Laura. She didn't pick up. I checked the Airbnb listing. It was gone, deleted. 2 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. A man's voice. "Did you stay at the cottage?" My stomach tightened. "Who is this?" He hesitated. "My sister rented that place a year ago. She heard noises in the attic too. She never came home." The line went dead. Story 5. I booked the lodge for a week, needing some solitude. I'd been working on a demanding project for months, and the idea of being alone in the mountains, away from the noise of the city, sounded perfect. The Airbnb listing described it as rustic and charming, with a cozy interior and a beautiful view of the forest. The host, a man named Henry, had excellent reviews, and past guests praised the peaceful atmosphere. The drive up was uneventful, but long. The road wound through dense forest, the trees pressing in on either side. My cell service flickered in and out, and by the time I reached the lodge, it was completely gone. That didn't bother me. I wanted quiet. The lodge was exactly as advertised, a simple wooden structure with a covered porch, a small living room, a kitchen, a bedroom, and a single bathroom. It had an old but functional charm. Wooden beams ran across the ceiling, and the floorboards creaked slightly with every step. The air smelled like pine and aged wood. I set my bags down and walked through the space. Everything seemed in order, except for one detail I hadn't noticed in the pictures: a small door under the staircase, about 3 feet high. It had a brass handle and no lock. Storage space, I assumed. I didn't open it that night. I made a simple dinner, sat on the couch, and read. The quiet was almost unsettling at first. No distant hum of traffic, no voices, just the sound of wind moving through the trees outside. I went to bed around 11 p.m. The lodge had no curtains, and moonlight spilled through the windows, casting soft shadows across the floor. I fell asleep quickly. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound, a soft creaking. I held my breath, listening. The sound came from downstairs, a single, slow creak of wood. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the house settling. It sounded like a footstep. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. My first thought was that I had forgotten to lock the door. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. My only option was to go check. I moved cautiously, stepping carefully to avoid making noise. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I scanned the room. The front door was locked. The windows were closed. Everything was exactly as I had left it. Maybe I imagined it. I turned to go back upstairs when my eyes landed on the small door under the staircase. The handle was slightly turned, as if someone had tried to open it. My skin went cold. I told myself it had probably been like that before. I hadn't checked. Still, I double-checked the front door and went back to bed, leaving the hallway light on. I barely slept. The next day, I tried to shake off my unease. I went for a long hike, cooked a proper meal, and spent the evening watching a downloaded movie on my laptop. By the time I was ready for bed, I felt calmer. I had just climbed under the covers when I heard it again, creak, a pause, another creak. It was slow, deliberate. I sat up, my breath shallow. The sound came from inside the lodge. I reached for the bedside lamp and flicked it on. The noise stopped immediately. For a long time, I sat there, staring at the open doorway of my bedroom, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Finally, I forced myself to lie down. I kept the lamp on. Somehow, I drifted off. I spent the entire next day trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe the sounds were the result of temperature changes in the old wooden structure. Maybe animals were moving around outside. But deep down, I didn't believe that. That evening, as I sat in the living room, I found my eyes drifting toward the small door under the staircase. I needed to check. I grabbed a flashlight and crouched down in front of it. My hand hesitated on the knob before I slowly turned it and pulled the door open. The space was small, maybe 6 feet deep, lined with old wooden planks. The smell of dust and stale air hit me immediately. Inside were a few old suitcases, a folded blanket, and what looked like a pillow, a sleeping area. I stared at it, my pulse hammering. Someone had been in here. Someone might still be in here. I backed away slowly, trying to stay calm. My mind raced. I had locked the front door every night. No one could have just walked in, which meant a sound stopped me in my tracks, a rustling noise from behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat, shining my flashlight across the dark room. Nothing. And then, a soft cough from inside the crawl space. My entire body went cold. I ran. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the front door, yanking it open and stumbling outside into the freezing night air. My car was parked a few feet away. I fumbled to unlock it, my hands shaking violently. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. My headlights illuminated the front of the lodge, and then the small door under the staircase slowly swung open. A shadow moved. I slammed the car into reverse and tore down the dirt road, my tires kicking up gravel. I didn't stop driving for miles. The next morning, from the safety of a diner in the nearest town, I reported the incident to Airbnb. They told me they would investigate and contact the host. Later that day, I checked the listing again. It was gone. I never heard back from Airbnb, never got an explanation.